As the clock ticks down on 2024 and 2025 begins, shipping is braced for another unpredictable year. Reading the runes of this industry is often a futile and thankless task. Predictions are regularly wiped out just hours after they are made. But, nevertheless, to prepare you for the new year, the Lloyd's List editorial team is going to be bringing you several mini episodes of the podcast over the next couple of weeks, in which they will discuss the things they are looking out for in 2025. We'll be talking about decarbonisation, risk and compliance, and the marine insurance sector over the next couple of weeks, but today we're talking about markets. I'll be joined by Greg Miller, senior maritime reporter based in New York, James Baker, containers editor based in London, and Robert Willmington, our markets editor, also based in London. They're going to take a look at the container, tanker, and dry bulk markets and tell you what you really should be looking out for next year. We start with Greg. Greg, Rob, James, thank you so much for joining me. Greg, let's start with yourself. Looking at the main shipping segments and looking back at what happened in 2024 and what's next, I suppose a good place to start is with container shipping. I mean, that has been a surprise. The liners are still making a lot of money. What do you think will happen in 2025?
Yeah, I really thought container shipping was in for a really hard landing after the COVID boom. Didn't happen. The liners have just kept on doing incredibly well. The thinking is that this is overwhelmingly due to the Red Sea crisis and the longer voyage distances. But if that's all it is, then I think the liners are still going to run into trouble at some point. They took delivery of a record number of new buildings this year, but this is far from over. 2025 is another huge year for new building deliveries, and then there's more ships for delivery in 2026, 27, 28. They keep on ordering more ships every week. Yet sooner or later, the capacity pressure from all of these deliveries has to overwhelm the upside from the Red Sea situation. So at some point, it will have to come down to capacity management. Liners will need to slow ships down, scrap older ships, and let the leased ships roll off those leases. So just because the liners did so well in 2020, 2024, doesn't mean they've figured this all out forever. If some of the big liner players go after market share instead of managing capacity, then at some point, we could still have this hard landing, everyone was talking about after COVID. As far as market disruptions, we've got the potential for another big U.S. port strike coming up in mid-January. That could increase rates, I think, but only if it's a really long strike, weeks long. And if there is a strike, it will be on day 5 when Trump is inaugurated. And, I just don't see him allowing this to drag on. As far as the Trump tariffs, that could be a really big deal. He's already talked about slapping another 10% on top of the current 10% on China. And the expectation is that there's more to come. If that happens, and if importers are given time to beat the deadlines, you could really see some added demand from the pull forward of cargoes, and that could really help the liners with rates in 2025. So maybe the profits just keep coming.
James, that's a pretty comprehensive view of the US market there from Greg. Have you got anything to add?
I guess the one thing that sort of remains in the picture is the fact that the Red Sea disruptions seem to be likely to continue at least for another year. There's no signs of that stopping. What situation in the Middle East remains the way it is. What this is doing for the market is increasing the ton mile or the TEU mile demand, and so that is soaking up quite a lot of this extra capacity. But I agree with Greg. I mean, this is what inevitably happens in container shipping. We have the boom times. We get a crazy amount of ordering on these positive vibes. But it's not matched by demand. At the moment, we have an artificial TEU mile demand because the carriers are having to take the long route round. However, that will eventually be met by supply, after which it's struggle to see which way rates are going. I mean, we've already seen on the Pacific that overcapacity there has seen rates slide somewhat. The Asia-Europe trade remains strong. However, the rates are ticking back down again after the boom time they've had. So how long this lasts, it does remain depending on other disruptions, remains to be seen. I'd say the other thing that's sort of likely to, or potentially going to put another spanner in the works, and how it pays out, I'm not yet sure. But we have got the alliances all beginning their reshuffle, which is going to tie in with the potential US strikes next year. We've got very ambitious goals by Maersk and Lloyd to try and improve reliability. How that's going to happen, whether that can be achieved, is a big unknown. We've got the rump of the alliance emerging as the premier alliance. There's a lot of work that's got to go into developing these networks, shifting the sailing patterns and everything. So I think from the shipper perspective, there's going to be continuing disruption going through into next year.
Thank you very much, James. Greg, just returning to you for the tanker market. I mean, business started out very strong in 2024, but the second half we've seen rates fall to quite disappointing levels. What does the sentiment look like for next year?
In the beginning of this year, people were really talking about a big boom for crude and product tankers. I was hearing the word super cycle, and it just didn't happen. Yet another case of shipping markets not following the script. I think what happened with tankers is that we had this big surge of demand post-COVID in 2023 as China and the rest of the world got going again. And at the same time, we had these major disruptions, both the Russia-Ukraine war and the Red Sea crisis, really affected tanker trades. So I think going into this year, the market was a little over exuberant. And so now, post-COVID rebound of demand is over. Demand has really been lackluster recently in the second half of this year, particularly in China. And the outlook for 2025 is really not that good in China. The economy's in trouble. They're using more electric vehicles. They're using more LNG-powered trucks. And also, the whole situation with sanctions and the dark fleet, that's bad for mainstream tankers, the ones whose rates are recorded in the indexes. What's happened is that the dark fleet for Russia and Iran, there's this enormous chunk of demand out there that is now basically off limits to Western fleets. It's gone. So I think, what happens in 2025 for tankers is not just about the big picture for demand, the global economy, China's economy. It's about what happens with the dark fleet and sanctions, and who knows what will happen with Trump on this. Maybe the world will bifurcate even further into these parallel fleets. In the Western tankers with Western P&I and financing will be even further blocked from, all the business in China. That would be bad. Or who knows, maybe Trump will go hog wild with secondary sanctions. Maybe that will work. Maybe China and India will opt to buy instead, again, from Saudi Arabia and the US. And that would add a lot of business back to the mainstream tanker trades. So just like container shipping, with tankers, you can make plausible arguments that 2025 could be really good or really bad, depending upon what happens.
And Greg, in our effort to go through every shipping segment in about 15 minutes, can I just move you on to dry bulk? Similar story really to tankers in 2024. Really good first half of the year. Disappointing second half of the year. How do you see 2025 playing out when it comes to dry cargo?
So, with container and tanker shipping, as I said, next year could be great, could be terrible. The thinking on dry bulk is different. People are thinking it could be terrible on one side or just okay on the other. But I haven't heard anyone saying dry bulk is going to boom next year. There's just no catalyst anyone can see, at least right now. In the Capesize market, it's really all about China. Chinese steel demand used to be about construction. That's over. It has been replaced by steel demand for manufacturing, things like EV cars and ships and manufactured goods. But Chinese imports of iron ore have outpaced Chinese domestic steel demand. So you're seeing a lot of Chinese steel exports on smaller bulkers, which is just not a good sign. It means China doesn't need all the steel it's producing. Also, a lot of the Capesize demand this year was for iron ore inventory building. And at some point, you just got to stop building inventories. The broader problem in dry bulk is the Panamaxes. There are just too many Panamaxes versus demand. And there's quite a few of new Panamaxes on order. The Panama Canal has now completely reopened. That's cutting Panamax ton miles. At the same time, less demand in China for corn from Brazil. That's leading to much lower port congestion in Brazil, another bad signal for Panamaxes. And the thing is, if there are too many Panamaxes, it affects everything else. The Panamaxes cannibalize coal cargoes from larger capesizes, and at the same time, they cannibalize minor bulk cargoes from the smaller geared Handymaxes. So overall, not looking so good for dry bulk in 2025. The thing is, though, in shipping, the one thing you don't expect to happen can turn out to be the thing that happens. And no one expects dry bulk to boom in 2025, so maybe it will.
Rob, if I just turn to you for a little bit of talk around shipbuilding, I mean, high demand for new ships means all the big top tier shipbuilders in China, Japan, South Korea have full order books for the next 3 years. How positive is the outlook for the shipbuilding sector in 2025?
I think we can say it's very positive. Anyone who works at a shipyard that's got a 3-year order book should be happy, I think. And so, in particular, this year we've seen a huge surge in container ship orders, almost 3 times as high as they were last year. We've also seen big orders for very large gas carriers, particularly those that can carry ammonia. There's also been major orders for LNG carriers, particularly for the Qatar gas project, both in South Korea and China. So I think executors should be very happy with these order books. I mean, some shipyards are actually stretched out to 2030 now. So some of the recent orders from Maersk have got 2030 delivery dates. We've not seen that kind of lead time since the last shipbuilding super cycle, which was in the late 2000s. But even in Europe, we've got shipyards that are mostly full now. So in the cruise ship sector, we've had a big boom in orders there this year. That's been very beneficial for shipbuilders like Fincantieri and Meyer-Werft. They've now got order books stretching out also to 2030. So I think this demand has really been pushed along by not just by the requirement to replace older ships, of which there's a lot about, but it's also been driven by regulation, which will create demand for more efficient ships. A lot of alternative fuel type vessels have been ordered this year as well. But also on top of that, we've got pretty good markets this year, and the markets for next year don't look too bad. I think the fact that ship owners have gone out and ordered so many ships suggests they're pretty optimistic about markets in the long term.
Thank you, Rob. I want to reflect on an earlier podcast that you put together with our APAC editor, Sijin Shen, about kind of the resurrection of dormant shipbuilders in China, which means more capacity is being added to meet demand. More supply doesn't usually mean a good thing. Is this good for shipbuilding?
I would say yes and no. So yes, in terms of this more extra capacity is definitely needed because there isn't enough capacity presently to build as many ships as the industry requires. This is partly due to a lot of shipyards closing down in after the global financial crisis, especially in China. And sort of starting last year and very much more this year, we've seen what were very large shipyards that were built during the last shipbuilding super cycle being reopened under new ownership. Some cases with private investment in China. But there is a risk with these shipyards because ultimately these are new shipyards. They've probably got, they have inexperienced workers. And there are risks which can come from that. So certainly we've heard that there are problems with obtaining refund guarantees, which will provide a ship owner with, reduce the risk of the ship owner. But some of these yards are currently unable to get the refund guarantees. There's also potential problems with the supply chain, with manufacturers not really wanting to deal with shipyards they've never dealt with before. So all of this can add risk. So things like delivery delays in particular, quality problems, lead to warranty claims, arbitration. So there are certainly risks to owners ordering at these new shipyards, but I believe that some of the big owners that are behind ordering at these new yards or resurrected shipyards, obviously have good reasons for doing so. So time will tell whether they made the right decision, I suppose.
If we just switch our attention to S&P, sell and purchase, which I know is another area of interest for you. Sell and purchase deals dropped in 2024 compared to 2023 or even 2022, particularly a big downturn for deals for tankers in the second half of the year. What happened? What are you expecting next year?
So we saw a big downturn in tanker sales from the second half of the year, but it had already been declining if we looked at the numbers that the shipbrokers gave us, comparing it to 2023 and 2022. That's partly due to the fact that we've had a big drop in sales of large tankers for the shadow fleet because the owners that sell them are concerned they may be sanctioned themselves. There's also market factors at play. So we've seen big falls in spot rates, being very volatile. And also the values of tankers and bulk carriers have kind of been rising continuously since 2021. I think there's been some sort of standoff now between sellers and buyers when they're looking at the earnings of these vessels, which is really now preventing them from making a deal. So that's partly why the prices have come down. And the people we speak to think that prices will continue to fall, partly because of rather negative views on what's going to happen in the tanker trades and the dry cargo trades next year.
In terms of actual numbers of ships being recycled, it's still very low, isn't it, compared to historical averages over the last 3 years? Surely owners are going to start scrapping ships soon.
Yes, we'd think so, wouldn't you? But everyone was saying the same thing last year, and nothing really much happened in 2023. We've actually seen the lowest level of ship recycling in almost 2 decades in 2023. So given we've had 3 years of very low recycling, it looks very much on the cards that will increase next year, particularly if you've got a lot of sort of 90s and early 2000 built ships on the large container ship segment, a lot of elderly bulk carriers as well. There's also the question of the shadow fleet. These are very high vintage vessels, which it's very likely that they'll be reaching the end of their lives soon. But the question is who's going to recycle them, because if any ship recycler is involved in transacting a dark fleet tanker, they could face major problems with currency transactions. So there is a big question mark about that. But undoubtedly, most people we think that ship recycling has got to take off again from next year. There may not be a surge, but there'll definitely be a lot more recycling than there has been in the last 3 years.
And that's where we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much to Greg, James and Rob, but more importantly, thank you to you for listening. We'll be back very soon with another episode in this series, but if you can't wait until then, remember, you can access every episode of the Lloyd's List podcast ever on SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. They're also all available to listen to in the Lloyd's List app. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful new year, and we'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.